Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited for this episode, episode number 21. But before we get started, yes, I do have another podcast for you guys, but you will not want to miss this one because they are freaking awesome. They're my favorite UK podcast right now, and I just love their accents, guys. You'll fall in love with these girls, and they do such an amazing job. They are doing the witch trials right now, and I'm hooked into every episode. So let's check out their trailer.
Hey, it's the Graveyard Girls, a true crime and mysteries podcast.
Join us every Tuesday and Thursday for a mixture of true crime, mysteries and conspiracy theory cases. And you can also find us on Patreon on Wednesdays, where we cover a variety of historical cases. But just to let you know, from the beginning of September all the way through till the end of October, we're doing a special witch trial season.
We are covering the trials in its entirety.
Yes, and we also touch on witchcraft.
Yes.
As a whole.
It's a whole mammoth season of 27 episodes.
Yes. Which will spread across both our Patreon and our free podcasting platforms. So we hope you'd like to join us for that.
In our cozy crypt.
In the meantime,
keep creeping.
And we'll keep digging.
All right, I'm so excited for this episode, so let's get started. My name is Kayla, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Okay, thank you guys so much for being here for episode 21. We are traveling today to the state of Washington, where we're going to be exploring Cape Disappointment. This is really cool. It is a haunted lighthouse with a residence on it, but I haven't done a lighthouse yet, and this one has some pretty crazy stories, and it's in a really weird spot, I guess you could say. So there's a lot of ships that crashed here, a lot of death. It's pretty crazy. So let's just go ahead and get started. If you're new here, I always start with a little history about the state and then some history about the city that it's in. And then I go into the topic. I'm so sorry about my chair. It's very old. I'm trying to convince my husband to get me a new chair. Fingers crossed, guys. Put it out into the universe that I need a new chair. Okay. So yeah, that's the order I go in things. And I'm going to start, like I said, I would tone down the history a little bit. I'm going to do it even a little bit more because some of the info that I'm really getting into, I'm starting to dive a lot deeper into things. So I'm like, I don't want these to be like 2-hour episodes because it's just me, you know? Like I'll listen to and That's Why We Drink. They have like 2 or 3 hour episodes, but I love them. They're hilarious. They're really into it. But I'm like, just me for 2 hours. And it takes so long to record, so long to edit, to post, all this stuff. So, okay, enough of the rambling today, guys. Let's get started. We're gonna talk about the state of Washington. I have some cool facts for you. So it was admitted into the Union as the 42nd state in 1889, and Olympia is the state capital, and the state's largest city is Seattle. Washington was named in honor of George Washington, and it is the only U.S. state named after a president. The state's coastal location and harbors have contributed majorly to its role as a huge leader in trade among Alaska, Canada, and other countries that are on the Pacific Rim there. Mount Rainier in Seattle is the highest peak in the continental U.S., and Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and it was the deadliest and most economically destructive volcano in U.S. history. On January 26th of 1700, a large earthquake 60 to 70 miles off the coast of the Pacific caused a massive tsunami that was roughly about 33 feet high that completely engulfed the Washington coast. Like, holy shit. Can you imagine? Like, You see all those movies. My husband loves like end of days movies, all of those. Yeah. But it's unreal. And then 33 feet high. Can you imagine like watching that just wash everything away? But what's really cool, it's not cool, but like 10 hours later, the tsunami actually hit the mainland of Japan with a 6 to 10 foot swell. So it's pretty crazy that it hit Washington and then like went back out and hit Japan. Crazy. Washington is one of the wealthiest, as well as the most liberal states in the country, and it ranks the best for life expectancy and low unemployment. Along with Colorado, Washington was one of the first to legalize cannabis, and it was among the first to legalize same-sex marriages also in 2012. In 2008, the voters approved on the legalization of physician-assisted suicide, and Washington is currently one of 10 states to have this practice legalized. So Washington is a leader in lumber. It's the largest producer of apples, hops, pears, blueberries, spearmint oil, and sweet cherries. And then it also is involved in livestock products, and commercial fishing, especially salmon, halibut, and bottom fish. And all those factors are huge contributors to their state economy. And Washington ranks second only to California in wine production, and of course is the home of the coffee chain Starbucks. So the city we're going to go into is hard to say. It's Ilwaco or Ilwaco. Okay. I'm going to say Ilwaco because it's kind of, I don't think it's like Waco. I think maybe it is Waco. Waco. It's ILWACO, but then in the pronunciation it's like IL-WAH, so Ilwaco/KOH. So we're gonna say Ilwaco. Sure. It's a city in the Pacific County of Washington. The population in 2010 was about 936. That's similar to where I live. It's a very small town. The city is located on the southern edge of the Long Beach Peninsula. I don't know where this is, so I'm just saying it for people who might know. It says on Baker Bay on the north side of the Columbia River where it meets the Pacific Ocean. It's actually near the city of Astoria, Oregon, which lies on the southern bank of the Columbia. So it's like literally right in between Washington and Oregon. But when I was looking up stuff about Washington, this one came up a lot. And like, of course, Ghost Adventures had been there, so I was like, and it said Washington, so I'm going with. So Ilwaco was first settled by a man named Henry Fester, I think, in 1851, and the name was Ilwaco. Okay, that's literally what I said. It's ELWHKO, so it's just spelled with an L instead of an E, or an I. Oh my gosh, an I instead of an E. Sorry. And his name was Ilwaco Jim, and he was the son-in-law to the chief at the time. Ilwaco was officially incorporated in 1890. And it served as a transportation hub for ferry travelers and railway passengers. And this was a fun fact. It also carried mail and oysters. Okay. Adding to the logging industry, it had a long history of being a cranberry producer, with which it had cranberry bogs, which seriously, they're like the coolest things. The cranberry bogs and all the cranberries float. Okay. Enough of that. So the Bell Tower Inn was built in 1928 as a church. The 1970s and 80s it served as barracks for fishermen. And this is also a haunted location there because witnesses report sounds of disembodied footsteps, unexplainable noises, and the curtains moving around and raising themselves. So yes, the bell tower is another haunted location there. And it says the Ilwaco community building was originally a hospital, and witnesses there report seeing ghosts of children as well as ghostly orbs of energy. Some report seeing a man's apparition holding a baby, very creepy, and the spirit of a red-headed woman who has been spotted walking toward what used to be a patient's room. Crazy. So, again, before we get started with Cape Disappointment, here is a quick word from my sponsor. Thank you guys so much for listening to it. All right, let's go ahead and get into our story. So, again, we're doing Cape Disappointment. It's like the craziest name ever, but I love it. But it is kind of named differently than you would think. That's what I thought when I first started researching this. So, Cape Disappointment is a piece of land along the Washington coast, and it was named after a British explorer's attempt to locate the Columbia River, which ended in disappointment. So, the first documentation of the site was in 1775 by a Spanish explorer named Bruno Heceta, who named it, Bahia de la Ascensión. Sure, it's in Spanish. I probably said it French. I apologize. Or it was called, in translate, it's the Bay of Assumption. The cape was officially named in 1788 when a British fur trader named John Meares, he was sailing south from Nootka Island in Canada in search for trade. He actually mistook the mouth of the Columbia River for a bay, which the ship could not enter due to a shallow shoal, whatever that is. After vainly trying to seek shelter from a turbulent sea, Meares wrote, quote, "Disappointment continued to accompany us. We can safely exert that no river sans rogue exists." Out of frustration, Meares christened the cape Cape Disappointment. In 1792, an American named Robert Gray, he was a seafarer, but he wanted to get into the fur trade for the China market. And he was the first to successfully cross the bar. We all know what a bar, and the river was actually named after his ship, which was the Columbia Rediviva, so the Columbian River. It starts as a small stream in the Canadian Rockies, but the Columbia River travels more than 1,200 miles, and it merges with all kinds of different rivers and streams until it meets the Pacific Ocean. The force of the Columbia flowing into the sea has created one of the most treacherous bars in the world, which is evident because there have been 234 identified shipwrecks that were either stranded, sank, or burned near the mouth of the river between 1725 and 1961. Meriwether Lewis laid eyes on the area in 1805, and then he returned to that camp on November 17th, and Patrick Gass wrote in his journal, quote, "They had been round the bay and seen where white people had been in the course of the summer, but they had all sailed away. For this reason, Cape Disappointment had a different, unhappy meaning than the men of the Corps." That part's a little confusing, I apologize. A white flag was placed on top of the cape, so there was nothing built there yet, which originally was used to mark the river entrance until these giant spruce trees grew up, so that marked the top spot. A lighthouse was then recommended for the cape, and in 1852 a contract was entered into for the construction, and it cost $24,000, which at that time is about $1 million, so that was a good chunk for that. So after starting to work on 4 other lighthouses in California, the contractors for those were named Gibbons and Kelly, and they were out of Baltimore. They then dispatched the ship called the Oriole to Cape Disappointment. But then in 1853, after waiting offshore for 8 days for the conditions to actually improve, the Oriole tried to cross the bar and wrecked directly below the Cape. There were 32 men on the crew, and they all escaped with their lives, but the vessel and all of the building supplies on board were completely lost. Construction actually didn't start until 2 years later, but then it was delayed again when they actually did not build the top of the tower large enough to accommodate the lantern room, and it says it wasn't big enough to hold the 4-ton first order Fresnel lenses that was manufactured in Paris, so that it just didn't build the top big enough to put the light up there. And then the entire tower had to be dismantled and rebuilt, sadly. So when Cape Disappointment was first lit, it was in 1856, and it became the 8th active light on the West Coast. So 6 of the 8 lighthouses were built in a circular form, protruding from the center of the keeper's dwelling, and if that makes sense. And then the other 2 ones, including Cape Disappointment, was only a singular room for a singular tower, for a circular tower, and then it had a detached dwelling for the keepers to live in, quite a distance away. So the difference between some of those. The brick tower stands 53 feet tall, has a focal plane of 220 feet above sea level, and the station was supplied with a 1,600-pound fog bell, but it was found to have little value due to the roar of the surf and the distance at which mariners needed to hear it. The first keeper of the lighthouse, his name was John Boyd. He was a disabled man who had a lot of hardships at Cape Disappointment before he died on duty in 1865. Life for these lighthouse keepers was really harsh. They had very few visitors, and they were on strict 24-hour schedule to tend the flame at the top for the incoming ships. Boyd said he found standing watch in the tower very unpleasant in the cool fall weather. He sent a request to his boss in San Francisco, and it said, quote, "As the winter advances, we find it very damp, cold, and uncomfortable, watching with the light without a fire in the tower. As the dwelling is situated so far from the tower, those having the watch are obliged to sleep there. We require a small stove very much, and shall suffer without one through the cold nights. One that we could heat oil and water on would be preferable." So Keeper Boyd, he suggested that perhaps the lighthouse should be relocated, but he received this advice instead. It said, quote, "All the windows in the lighthouse buildings to be opened, and all precautions taken, if possible, to prevent injury to the lenses, lamps, and other pieces of apparatus connected with the lighthouse." So they just did not care about their lightkeepers at all. So another excerpt from him, one of the biggest annoyances was the dwelling that they could live in, which was located downhill from the lighthouse. And in 1858, he wrote to his superior again, concerned about that. He said, quote, "I wish to make a request with regards to our dwelling. There is about a foot of water in the cellar, making the house, as you doubtlessly already know, very damp and uncomfortable, and it is not only disagreeable but unhealthy during the winter. I have made no complaint before, but have borne the inconveniences year after year, hoping that something could be done to make our dwelling more comfortable." And then to make it even worse than it was before, Keeper Boyd and his assistants there actually failed to receive their salary for 5 quarters and were forced to just live off credit. And then again, Boyd passed away that October in 1865. Kind of going back to 1858 real quick, the second assistant keeper, Harrington, was crossing over the river to Astoria in one of the station's boats when it capsized. A man on the far shore saw the assistant keeper, Harrington, climb onto the bottom of the boat and they sent 3 Indians in a canoe to rescue him, but before they could reach him, the boat drifted into the breakers and Harrington was never seen again. Another new lighthouse keeper then came in, Captain J.W. Munson. He was there 1865 to 1877. In 1865, there was a wreck near the Cape and 24 people on board, and only 7 of them survived. Munson was really messed up that he couldn't save anyone because they don't have a life-saving craft available for the keepers. So he actually found a longboat on the beach, and Munson rebuilt it to use as a lifeboat to help the locals. In 1866, a ship named the Scranton, it was loaded with 800 tons of freight from San Francisco, was driven into the middle of the sandbar, and Munson launched his craft with few other men, and he was actually able to rescue the entire crew. And through all of his efforts, a life-saving station was actually established at Cape Disappointment in 1871, and his famous boat actually became part of the station's initial equipment. And you can actually find TV shows. When I was looking up information about Cape Disappointment, there are TV shows out there about the Coast Guard there, because there's now a huge tradition of life-saving things today. And you can watch the training school and watch them go out on life-saving missions. It's pretty cool. A new double dwelling for Cape Disappointment's keepers was built in 1871, and it was about 1,300 feet north of the lighthouse. And each side of the duplex contained 11 rooms. The principal keeper occupied one side, and the 2 assistants shared the other. And they actually had to build a new bell house after a gun blast from a nearby battery shattered the old one. James Anderson, he came to the Cape in 1877 to replace Munson, and during the 17 years Anderson spent at the station, he would have moments of really amazing happiness, followed by extreme sorrow. And here are some entries into the station's logbook. August 4th, 1881, marriage at Lightkeeper's dwelling house, James Anderson to Henrietta Sorensen, light breeze from southwest, very warm. And it says James was 54 and Henrietta was 24. Interesting. December 15th, 1883, a more beautiful sunset could never have been witnessed as last night. So brilliant clouds and the horizon all around for a great distance, with all imaginable colors of all kinds as ever the eye could behold, until about 20 minutes after the setting of the sun, when all changed lighthouse lamp and burner. So then a couple days later, December 17th, born at Lightkeeper's dwelling at 3 a.m. to the wife of James Anderson, a daughter. So a little less than a year later, October 13th of 1884, infant daughter of James Anderson and Henrietta Anderson died at 4 a.m. this morning at Fort Canby, aged 9 months, 26 days. Peace be with her soul. And then almost another year later, July 26th of 1885, died at keeper's dwelling, house infant child of James Anderson at 4:00 p.m., Henrietta Marie Anderson, age 5 months and 15 days. This is just heartbreaking, like, ugh. So another man came in as keeper. His name was Alexander Pessian. Sure. He had been serving at a different lighthouse, and so he was transferred up there to be the head keeper. He was actually born in Finland in 1859, and he immigrated in 1876. Pessinen, I think is how you say it. He married a woman named Mary Watson in 1890, 2 years after arriving to Cape Disappointment. In the spring of 1923, Pessinen took his wife to a doctor in Portland, Oregon, where she was diagnosed with, quote, melancholia. She was probably depressed, a condition marked by persistent depression and ill-founded fears. See, I would totally be locked away, like seriously. The couple returned to North Head on June 8th, and the following morning, Mary arose early and went for a walk with her dog, Jerry. The dog returned a short while later, and its behavior alerted Keeper Pessinen that something was wrong. The local paper explained what happened next. He notified the boys at the radio station and also at the Weather Bureau, and a searching party was soon organized. The dog led searchers to a spot just under the fire control station near the North Head Lighthouse, which is also known as Cape Disappointment. For some reason, it has like two names now, but North Head and Cape Disappointment are the same thing. And they found her coat, lying on the edge of a cliff. A trail through the tall grass, as though someone had slid down the cliff, was little evidence of what had befallen the unfortunate woman. Watson's body was eventually located and secured from a cove at the base of the cliff. Since the 1950s, visitors have reported seeing her ghost wandering through the lighthouse and the house where she lived. So this area is also known as the graveyard of the Pacific, and the Columbia Bar is very infamous. So at the mouth of the Columbia River sits the Columbia Bar, which is very dangerous. The bar is about 3 miles wide and reaches about 6 miles into the ocean, and it's said to be a navigational nightmare and has claimed over 2,000 vessels and 700 lives since 1792. The Columbia has a worldwide reputation. The U.S. Coast Guard station in Cape Disappointment responds to hundreds of calls. With the construction of the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse and the North Head Lighthouse, it did reduce the number of shipwrecks that occurred at the mouth of the Columbia, and these lighthouses are still operated today. 1853 was pretty disastrous for shipwrecks. 3 large sailing ships sank that year. One was the Vandalia, which sank in 1853. All 12 crew members were lost. 4 bodies washed ashore. Captain E.N. Beard, for whom Beard's Hollow is named after, and the 3 other crew is what is known as Dead Man's Cove. So we will talk about Beard's Hollow also. So some of the famous shipwrecks off the Long Beach Peninsula. 1830. I'm just going to do the years. Sorry, it's a lot longer when I do the month, day, and year. So 1830 was the Isabella, this Hudson Bay company. It was a supply ship, and it sank off Sand Island near the mouth of the river. In 1986, a diver discovered the wreck while trying to free a snagged fishing net, and it's now an Oregon State archaeological site, and it's significant for being the only known example of this type of vessel from this era. 1841 was the Peacock. It was a U.S. naval brig, and the captain followed the charts perfectly, but the ship still hit the bar, and they had to abandon the Peacock after hours of trying to free the ship. 1853 again was the Vandalia that we had talked about. 1896 was the Glen Morag. It was caught in a thick fog and lost its course, and it wrecked north of the Ocean Park after the crew abandoned the ship. 1909 was the Alice. During a storm, the French square-rigged ship called the Alice ran aground near Ocean Park with 3,000 tons of cement. The entire crew made it ashore, but the cement hardened, causing it to sink deep in the sand. The mast and the rigging actually became a landmark and a tourist attraction until about 1930, but Alice will make rare appearances during low tides too. 1928 North Bend. It was known as the ship that walked on land. It got stuck on the bar and remained there for a year. And the waves around the ship actually began cutting a channel in the sand and the ship. 1930, Admiral Benson, again a heavy fog. It became stranded near the bar. And again, during low tides, you can see parts of the ship still. The Václav Vorovsky, wrecked on the Columbia Bar with 40,000 cases of lard. I can't get that word out. Lard. And local bakeries actually came and bought the lard at very low prices. Okay. 1947, the Arrow. This was an Army ship, and it became a passenger liner to the Hawaiian Islands. It was set to retire, but as it was being hauled to Astoria, the tow line broke and it was washed ashore in Ocean Park. The Betty M had 900 tons of tuna and wrecked below the lighthouse. And again, you can sometimes see it during low tides. And lastly, the United States deemed Cape Disappointment strategically significant enough to base military fortifications there during Civil War and World War II. Construction of the lighthouse completed in 1856, and the decommissioned military fortification at the lighthouse are now shown at the Cape Disappointment State Park, which is right near it. So those are the history and the facts of Cape Disappointment. So I want to get into a little bit of spookiness. Of course, we go to our good friend Zach Bagel Bites. I do love Zach, guys. I do. I have been binge watching Ghost Adventures because they just started a new season. And it also helps me kind of get ideas on new stuff. But I do like Zach. I've liked him since I was younger because I started watching it when it first came out. And he's super hot, guys. I know he's weird, but he is hot. So I'm admitting that now. Zach, I know you don't listen to this, but I love you. And I'm sorry I call you Zach Bagel Bites, but Zach Bagans. Bagans? See, I say it wrong anyway. So, this was season 20, episode 9 of Ghost Adventures. So, I take notes through the whole episode. So, these are just kind of rough notes that I'm going to try to remember. I've literally researched 3 other episodes, and so now I'm going back to this trying to remember everything. So it is a haunted lighthouse from previous keepers, and we will go back to the story of Mary and her husband. And there's also Dead Man's Hollow, where wrecks and bodies have washed ashore. The lighthouse actually has a really creepy forest next to it. As you're walking from the lighthouse to the residence, or the residence down to Dead Man's Hollow, it was really creepy. But yes, all of it is still in use today. There are people that still live in the house who still work the lighthouse. So, they always, interview different people and walk around with different people. and they were speaking. I think her name's Barbara. I crossed it out, but I might be wrong or right. So there's a spot in the house called Mary's spot, and it's like a certain window that they look out onto the ocean. And Mary's husband, remember, it was Alex Pessinen. That's who we're speaking about. And Mary believed that there was a dark force upon the two of them. Mary sat in the kitchen and wrote a letter to Alex. It was very odd, and I think we're going to continue talking about that in a second. But yeah, Mary was on a lot of medicine. She refused to take it, and she said she would survive on prayers and that death ruled suicide. She was very afraid of her husband and was in complete isolation out there, like we had talked about. No visitors, or very few, and hard, long days. The caretakers of the house, this lady named Wendy came in. She's a sensitive psychic, and she kept saying this is not a happy place. She feels a lot of anger and a lot of relationships where people just did not get along. That was in the residence, and then she went into the lighthouse, and she had to get out. Like her stomach and her head started hurting and feeling awful. She felt like she was gonna pass out because all she could feel in there was just immense frustration and anger. She said she could feel a large and a small present, like a small female, looking out towards the ocean. So that's back in the residence. Sorry. And then they were walking along down the cliff to Dead Man's Hollow, and she said she could actually feel this very heavy, very emotional, dark energy around her, which it could have been Mary's because of where she died, but she feels it like it's ancient, like it's not, like it is not Mary, and she believes that it may have been a Native American spirit or multiple Native American spirits. Again, Wendy is more than happy to get out of the lighthouse, out of the residence, because she just keeps feeling awful. She had bad head pressure from the negative presence, and says that there's a very angry male here. So it's, during the day while they're doing interviews and everything, and so Aaron runs in back to the house all alone to do an EVP session, and I didn't write down if he was asking questions, but sometimes they do. But all of a sudden, this voice came over, and it was a female voice that said, "Someone coming." And these EVPs were so clear, because a lot of the times I'm like, oh my God, I didn't hear that at all or something. But these were very clear. You could really tell what was happening. It was very creepy. I have the chills. So that was a female voice. And then another voice came along. I'm pretty sure Aaron was like, "Who's coming? Who's coming?" And another voice, a male voice, came over that said, "Need to know." So then Aaron goes over to that window where they said was Mary's spot. And he was saying, this is where Mary's been seen. And again, that male voice comes over and it says, "You'll see." Gosh. And it's like, you have to watch the episode because the female voice is very soft and quiet, but you can tell there's something emotionally off with it. But then the male voice is very creepy, and you can tell it's angry. Like it's very weird, but it's true. So they go to the Maritime Museum in Oregon, and they have this huge display of thousands of shipwrecks. And the big one they talk about is the Vidalia shipwreck that we talked about, and how all the crew did not survive. Beard's Hollow is where the captain had washed ashore, and then everyone else had washed ashore in Dead Man's Hollow. And the guy was saying that this area is so dangerous, like even motorized boats And ships, even, they have a hard time getting through it, even though they have the motorized, they have better reaction times, all that. And so it's like, could you imagine how difficult it was in a wooden boat or a wooden ship trying to get through those waters? You should definitely look at the area. It's pretty crazy looking. Thinking about boats getting in there. This man and Zach talked about spirits in the water, and they said especially Native American spirits. During this time, the Chinook tribe lived there. They were very peaceful. They worshipped land animals. There were about 16,000 of them, but sadly, when Lewis and Clark came through, there were only 400 of them. Then, eventually, only 20 of them because of the diseases that were brought by the white man. So Billy, Zach, and Aaron are all sitting inside the residence, just at the table, and going over the voices that Aaron heard about, someone's coming, need to know, and you'll see. So while they're listening to these, and they've only listened to Mary, the first female voice, all they heard so far is someone coming. And Aaron's sitting there and he goes completely frozen. Like, he is freezing while they're going these EVPs. And then they literally hear like a snarling growl around them. Like, not in the EVP, like around them. It's a very creepy sounding. And then all of a sudden, Zach flips out. Like, he's getting possessed by something, and he has a meter or something in his hand. And he chucks it like near Billy. Like, it passes by his shoulder, but it hits the table and flies everywhere. And he gets up and walks away. And so they get up and they go to find Zach, and Zach's so angry. And he felt like the guy had jumped into him. And him and Aaron were like completely shaking. Like, it was a mess. But it was very clear. Zach's demeanor's changing so quickly, and you can see it in his face. Like, they're just sitting there, and then he flips, and then he's throwing stuff and running away. And again, so they had only heard Mary's voice, so they believed that the male entity didn't like them playing her voice. Zach actually had to go outside and cool off to kind of get him off of him. So again, they're trying to get set up because it's getting dark, and there's huge interference in everyone's microphones. It'll come and go. It was just very weird. And then they're trying to set up the night vision cameras, and they all start working, or some of them start just restarting themselves. And Zach's like in another room, kind of not with everybody, and he's just talking to himself. And he says, quote, "Don't cry and don't tell me to calm down," like in a very angry voice. So he says, "Don't cry and don't tell me to calm down. Do you understand, Mary? You're not gonna tell me that. Get up." Like, that was word for word what Zach said, and I didn't even say it angry enough. And he says that Mary was standing on the staircase wearing yellow, I'm assuming like a dress. And she was crying and telling him to calm down. So Zach feels like he's completely crazy. He's saying he sees these long, vivid images, and that he believes that Mary's husband is channeling through him so that he can see Mary on the stairs. So he asks, why doesn't he like us here? So Zach is telling them all these things, and so Jay asks him, why doesn't he like us here? And Zach turns and replies to him and says, none of your business. It was a really good episode. You should watch it. So Zach is still struggling, and Jay is still asking Zach questions while the husband is, in his body. Jay asks, did he kill her? Zach got so mad, especially at Jay. Then Jay asks Zach if he's in control or not. And Zach says, quote, you can get out. Do you hear me? And then he like walks over and gets really into Jay's face and says, you can get out of the fucking house, Jay. And he's like screaming at him. It was like everybody's face is just jaw on the floor. It was very crazy. And Jay asks, why? Am I right? Zach says, no, you can get out. And so Jay says, why? So Jay's just poking the bear, So Zach yells, quit asking questions. And then Jay says, what are you afraid of? Zach again yells at him, saying, quit asking questions. And then he walks away. And so this man is, wow. You can definitely see his demeanor is very, very weird. So everybody's figuring out that the husband is massively affecting Zach. So Zach gets the spirit box. He's kind of coming down, but he's still struggling. And right after it's turned on, it just says, what happened? In a female voice. So it's like Mary is asking, what happened? And it was right as they turned it on. No one said a word. And then all of a sudden it comes through. What happened? Very distinct, very female voice. Like, I keep getting chills, guys. And I watched this episode like twice to make sure I had everything. And so Zach says, that was Mary. That was Mary that talked. And so Zach is telling the husband that he needs to leave. That he needs to leave him alone. He doesn't want to feel any more anger. And so Zach asks the spirit, tell me, why are you so angry? I write notes like a child because I'm a millennial and I like written notes sometimes. And then through the spirit box, you get a very loud male voice that says, you got it. Zach was again explaining, you have no permission to use my body anymore. And slowly Zach kind of starts to feel better that the spirit had left him. So they were using an SLS camera. Not sure what that stands for, but it's the one where it detects like the little skeleton things, the dots and the arms, and so it's like seeing a different figure or something in there. And so Zach is sitting on the bed and they're using this camera, and this little figure, like small, it doesn't have large arms or legs like adult height, it's very small. It appears on the bed by Jay, and then Jay gets crazy cold and his EMF is spiking. So there's definitely a presence in the bedroom by the bed frame, because that's where it keeps spiking. And the creature on the bed, it's like reaching for Jay, and then all of a sudden another one pops up in the window, and they're not ground floor, so it's like you can't peek in the window, I keep getting chills. So then all of a sudden Zach's spine hurts. Zach, I love you. And so Zach, yeah. And Aaron runs to him to see if he's okay, and Zach says he is having pain in his lower spine, and he thinks maybe it's the effects of being entered by the angry male. And Zach sees a dark shadow reach for Jay. like very, very quickly, Jay said he heard it. And at this time, Zach is laying on one of the beds. Because again, his spine hurt and he needed to lay down. And that's, he's laying down, he's looking across the hallway to Jay and sees this figure just appear, and reach for Jay. So, they're, Zach's laying down, they're looking in this room, trying to figure out what's going on. And, when they look in there, Aaron is like, oh my God, what's that? Well, it was the clock, like, a bedside table clock that no one uses anymore. And it was flashing. So, yeah. And so they're looking into this room, and then all of a sudden, the door literally starts closing on them. Full view of the cameras, just everyone standing there, and the door legit just starts closing. No one's moving. Like, they're in the house, there's no wind. It was the creepiest thing to watch. I kept oh my God, I keep getting chills. I kept rewinding to go look at it again, because it was just the weirdest thing. Like, and then all of a sudden it stops abruptly and all the activities end in the house. All of them. It's so freaking crazy. It's a very good episode. I highly recommend it. So then Aaron and Jay, they go to the lighthouse. While they're in there, they're getting massive dizzy spells, feeling sick, because the stairs spiral up, They get the cameras set up, and then they get a female voice again. Just randomly, like, they're not asking questions to her. And it says, looking up. They can't understand. They keep getting the same voice again. This female voice has never changed how it sounds. Aaron actually got really scared. They both felt like someone was running up behind them. Very, very, very creepy. So they get up to a spot and they sit, and they're using this thing called a zenith radio. It's very old and it scans frequency dials. And it's similar to some of the new equipment that they use, where it'll automatically scan. But this one was an old one. They were very excited about it. So they actually kept getting beeping sounds, like a distress call. So they said it might be a residual distress call. I don't know, whatever you guys think. So Billy and Zach actually go to Dead Man's Hollow, where a lot of bodies had washed up. They thought they saw a dark silhouette figure in the ocean, and a light in the sky, like right above or close to the water, but a lot of it you couldn't see with the naked eye. They were looking through their cameras, and so it may be, a trick of the eye, or it could have been there and they couldn't see it without their cameras. So Billy and Zach don't get a ton of stuff out there, but the rocks are crazy and they're sharp and they're very wet and slippery. So they come back, and Aaron and Jay are continuing to talk to Mary, and they're asking her about what happened, and a woman's voice comes through again and says accident. That was a huge part of their investigation, is they wanted to know how Mary died, if it was suicide, if it was an accident, if it was murder, and she definitely put those claims aside when she told them that it was an accident. It's just very, very crazy. So on Cape Disappointment, there's a lot of sadness, a lot of anger, and a lot of it could be coming from Mary and her husband Alex with everything that we went through, but sounds like there were a lot of lightkeepers and a lot of terrible conditions, people dying on site, and you have children that died on site. So very Cape Disappointment sounds pretty crazy, and I highly recommend that episode. It was very good. So yeah, that is the conclusion of episode 21 of Cape Disappointment. Definitely go check out the Graveyard Girls. I love them. You guys will as well. I just know it. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Dark Tales from the Road. Facebook, Dark Tales from the Road. Podcast, I think it ends in podcast. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Dark Tales from the Road. To help support my show. I'm saving up for a new computer, so that is all going back to my show. I don't personally, I don't use my computer other than for this show. So I promise you, none of that is going into my pocket. It's going to make my show better. So I also have a site called Buy Me a Coffee if you don't want to do Patreon. There are benefits to both of them, and they're all pretty similar. So it's just whatever you would like to do. And it's buymeacoffee.com/darktales. They wouldn't let me do my whole name. So yeah, definitely check those out. If you guys would like to support the show, you get the episode a day early. I have stickers, and I'm working out a huge plan to do a ton more like bonus episodes, or I'm just really trying to figure out what to do with those. So yeah, and you can email me, darktalesfromtheroad@gmail.com. Definitely tell your friends. I've been getting so much support lately. It's unbelievable, and I'm so happy with what's happening, and I just want to keep building and building and building to make an amazing podcast for you guys. So I think that's it for today. Thank you again for listening to episode 21 on Cape Disappointment. Next week, we're going to be heading to Arkansas in Eureka Springs to investigate the very crazy happenings at the Crescent Hotel. So you guys won't want to miss it. Thank you again. Everybody have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.